Hello there. Now, I know you were expecting Roddy's face and some guy in a tie just showed up, but believe me, I'm here for the same thing that Roddy was. I don't have a fancy, you know, Star Wars thing behind me, but let's see if we can get through the next few minutes and just talk about one of my favorite aspects of the movies. Before we start, I'm gonna offend some of you die-hard fans there because I've only watched the movies. I don't really have a reason for why I haven't watched the other stuff, but I seem to have a fair amount of time on my hands these days, and I'm actually getting into the Clone Wars, and I'm still waiting for my download of The Mandalorian, so hopefully I'll catch up with you guys soon. But episode 1 up to 9. Oh, also Rogue One, Solo. Yeah, I've seen all those. And I just love the idea of the Force. In fact, I think the Force is kind of the reason why everything happens in all those movies. You look at the first three, for example. You have this huge republic, and it controls everything, and the Jedi are just there, sort of like the church. Uh, it's like they're like, yeah, well, we have all these awesome powers, but we're only going to use them to help others, and we don't support the use of these powers for any selfish reasons. So, they are against passion. In fact, I actually think that the Jedi are kind of toxic positive at that point. Well, as they exist in the first trilogies, because they're like, shut out fear, you know. In fact, Yoda says it in, is it, is it, is it Return of the Jedi? I always forget the names of each episode, but it should be episode 5, where he says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate to the dark side leads, and of course you have the Sith on the other side, who basically believe the total opposite of what the Jedi believe. They're like, hey, if I have all these awesome powers, I am going to use them. In fact, the whole idea of the Sith is that, well, I know from like reading up on the other stuff that I haven't watched yet, that there are different like versions of the dark side, different versions of the Jedi. So I know that portion that I've seen begins with what do they call it? Something two, the order of two or something. I forget. But basically, they believe that power is a purpose in itself. So, in other words, they're not trying to harness the Force for any general good. They just want it for its own sake, which is kind of cool, but kind of weird and scary at the same time. So, it's an interesting phenomenon. Anyway, that's what I'm trying to say. So I think from what I've seen of the movies, it's one of those great misunderstood things, because the Jedi have sort of a grasp on what the Force is, and the Sith also have their own grasp on what the Force is. But from watching the movies, you get a sense that the ultimate thing with the Force is balance, because it keeps tipping this way and that. You start off with the Republic, and they have their own version of what they call order and peace, but the Sith are unhappy with this. The Jedi are okay with it, but the Sith are unhappy with it. And there's always these wars, like I know across the history of what is the Star Wars timeline, there's been all these wars. So when we do join, when we find them in episode one, there's all this turmoil that's been there for ages, and as the story unfolds, you find that the Jedi, there's a part of the Jedi that's like there's a prophecy that there's one who will come who will bring balance to the Force, which is great because, like I said, my understanding of it, of the whole thing, excuse me, is that balance is so important in the whole the Force story. So the prophecy is a great thing, but as happens with a lot of beliefs, and I think George Lucas sort of played with some religious ideas as well in the creation of that whole story, is generally people will always be people, and people will always sort of twist these things to their own ends. I mean, while we're on it, that whole midichlorians thing was kind of weird. I think I would have felt happy if they just said, the Force is strong with him, kind of like what they did with Luke, but that's a whole other thing, I guess. But yeah, you see both sides wanted him, and I always find that interesting because to me, it speaks to the idea that maybe there isn't a right or a wrong way of using the Force, because in their own way, the Jedi are actually sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a dictatorship of sorts on its own, because they're telling you, okay, you can only use the Force for others, you can only use the Force this way, you need to shut out negative emotions like anger, passion. And it's interesting that both sides shun love. I mean, love in the sense of romantic love. So when Anakin falls in love with Padme, you see, the one side is already against it, the Jedi are against it, but the side that's luring him as well, actually, in a way, uses that against him. You know what I mean? So you could say both the Jedi and the Sith sort of abuse their power, or the powers that they gain from the Force. But anyway, there's so much that we could talk about. But I love how, I guess one of the better definitions is the one that Obi-Wan gives. I'm paraphrasing, but then he says, well, the Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It's what binds the galaxy together, you know? So if it binds the galaxy together, you can see through the progression of the movies that need for balance. You have the Republic, which leans toward the Jedi a lot, and so Palpatine comes along and he seeks to destroy both the Jedi and the Republic, and so the balance sort of tips a little bit and goes towards the dark side. And then I actually read some interesting facts that there's some part of the dark side that believes that the Force actually is for destruction, and they believe that Palpatine could succeeded in destroying the Jedi and the Republic because he was working towards destruction, but then he was defeated when he started trying to build the Empire. So I don't know. Make of it what you will, but like I was saying, you go from the Republic to the Empire to the Rebellion, and at the end of episode 6, we're so excited because now we're like, yes, the Force is being used for good, no more bad guys. And then we come back in episode 7 and we have the First Order. The First Order. and we've leaned back toward the dark side again. So it's an interesting thing. I think the way they present it is that it's difficult to define what the force is, but what I love most about it is the idea of being in control not only of yourself but of your environment. And this is on both sides, whether it's the dark side or the light side. These guys are so in harmony with everything that they can sense what's going on in another person. It's sort of science and religion at the same time, because you have, for example, Darth Vader, who is supposedly the baddest of them all. Well, next to the Emperor, I guess. But Darth is on this trajectory. He started off as a nice enough guy, and then he just grows in power, harnessing the power of the dark side. And yet, when he meets Luke Skywalker, Luke can sense that within dark there still exists that potential for good, and you know that results in the fall of the empire. So yeah, it's quite interesting when you look at how the force plays out in everything. I mean, look at the final trilogy, where you have Kylo and Rey, who are sort of in touch with each other. It's like they're spirit twins or something, because at any point in time they can see each other and talk to each other, without necessarily knowing where the other person is or what they're doing. And I think it's amazing. I was kind of hoping they'd like fall in love and have kids and stuff. Um, is that was that too much to hope for? I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, they can see each other across space and time, and it creates a very interesting dynamic between the two, because Kylo wants so much to live up to the name of Darth Vader, and that also leaves him with some scars of his own. I think it also limits his power in certain ways, but it's interesting to see how Rey sort of gets into it without actually having any training. It's like she understands this thing out there and I can use it, and I think she's quicker to learn how to use the Force than even Luke. I stand to be corrected, but I feel like she had greater control way faster than Luke ever did. Full disclosure, I always hoped at some point like Han Solo would also get a piece of the action, but maybe that would have been too much. It's fine that some people can and some people can't, I suppose, wield the powers of the Force. But all in all, I think it's a great tool. I think if I could have access to the Force, I would love to be able to use the Jedi mind trick. Like I like when Obi-Wan and Luke are on their way off the planet, and they have these guys from these stormtroopers, and and Obi-Wan goes, "You don't need to seize identification. These aren't the droids you're looking for. He can go about his business. Move along." But it was so cool. So I find it interesting. Like, these guys are so in harmony with everything. You can actually move physical objects without touching them. You can find anyone anywhere in the galaxy. So it's sort of like being in tune with the world, and it just requires a certain level of knowledge, of self, of awareness of how the whole thing holds together. And I think it makes the whole story quite interesting because, you have this gigantic power, but instead of giving it to one side, like, no shade to superheroes and superhero stories, but I've always been like, superhero stories always have that thing where you're like, yeah, well, Superman has too much power, so who really can fight against Superman, or Thanos, that kind of thing. But in this case, the ground is actually kind of level because the bad guys and the good guys have access to the same power, and it doesn't, it's not like our religion that we practice here, where we say, no, if you are good, you will have the power, but if you are bad, you will rot. It works for everyone, and it then becomes a question of, do we really understand what the force is? What are its ends? Why does it exist? Is it a betterment for the good or for the evil? We don't really know. All we know is that it exists. And it drives a lot of key points in the story. So, those are just my thoughts on the Force. None of this is backed up by any scholarly information. Just here as a fan of the franchise, and it's always the most exciting part of things for me, when Luke starts learning how to move things with his mind. My favorite scene is the one where, is it Luke or Ray? I need to rewatch those things. I think it's Luke who's sitting on a rock, on like a cliff somewhere, and he's sitting there and he's in tune with everything. And you see these little grains of dust and little pebbles coming up, and it's like, the force is strong with this one. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Hopefully I'll see you again sometime soon.